Welcome, everyone. We hope you're able to view our video and hear us well. You are joining today's town hall, the first of a three-part teaching learning series sponsored by the Association for Undergraduate Education at Research Universities, formerly the Reinvention Collaborative. My name is Stephen Dandino, and I'm the Executive Director of URU. That's how we're shortening our name now. Instead of the RC, we're dropping the A and emphasizing the UERU, URU. So welcome to URU's Town Hall, featuring one of our core members, Michael Dennin from the University of California at Irvine, who is very gracious in offering to kick us off with this series with a town hall entitled, as you know, Questioning Assumptions in Teaching and Learning. And what that title lacks in specificity, it makes up for an intrigue factor. I hope you'll agree with me about that. Questioning assumptions in teaching and learning. And in a moment, I'm going to kick it over to our co-sponsor, which is the Institute for Learning and Teaching here at Colorado State University, the host of URU, which has been so hosting us for, since 2013. So we're 2 minutes past the hour. Let me go ahead and let's get started. We have about 100 participants currently. We'll go ahead and get started. This webinar, this town hall is being recorded, and we will post the recording at the URU website. We'll give you that information. Please share it widely with any colleagues that you may think are interested. And at this time, let me go ahead and introduce my colleague, Dr. Gwen Gorzleski, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Learning and Teaching at Colorado State University. Gwen is also a member of the Teaching and Learning Colloquium Planning Committee, as we're looking forward to hosting such in November of this year, a committee that Dr. Dennin actually chairs. So Gwen, let me turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve. Well, I am delighted to have this opportunity to introduce Professor Dennin, as his work overall and his talk today align so well with CSU student success endeavors, which TILT, the Institute for Learning and Teaching, supports through our faculty and student programs. Professor Dennin has been professor of physics and astronomy at the University of California, Irvine since 1997, and he was appointed vice provost for teaching and learning and dean, Division of Undergraduate Education, in May of 2015. He received his bachelor's degree in physics from Princeton University and his PhD and master's in physics from University of California, Santa Barbara. His research focuses on the dynamics of foams, Langmuir monolayers, and modeling of ice melange. These studies in complex fluids are crucial for many applications, including foam use in oil recovery, as well as granular matter in the form of powders and pills in the medical industry. Professor Dennin is a Sloan Research Fellow and a Research Corporation Cottrell Scholar. He's also a recipient of UCI Senate Awards in all three categories: UCI Senate Distinguished Mid-Career Award for Service, UCI Senate Distinguished Faculty Award for Teaching, and UCI Senate Distinguished Assistant Professor Award for Research. Professor Dennin has been very active in translating educational research to practical applications within the university. He's also dedicated to public outreach in the area of science, teaching a number of massive open online courses, or MOOCs, including co-teaching one based on the AMC TV program The Walking Dead. In fact, he has appeared in numerous television programs, including Science of Superman, Spider-Man Tech, Batman Tech, Star Wars Tech, and Ancient Aliens. Very cool. You can find Professor Dennin in the YouTube series Fascinating Fights, debating the outcome of battles between pop icons. In addition, he serves as an expert on the podcast Fascinating Gadgets, Gizmos, and Gear-Based Technologies, where he explains how to make fictional technology a reality. And recently, he published a science outreach book on the intersection between science and faith, Divine Science, Finding Reason at the Heart of Faith, from Franciscan Media. So, Dr. Dennin, we are so delighted to have you here, and we'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Gwen and Steve. It's great to be here, even if it's virtual, sort of sitting here with part of UCI behind me. What I've done, I've prepared a few PowerPoint slides. I'm slowly getting used to talking just to myself on a screen at these webinars. I'm not completely used to it yet. I do still plan to, at 3 key points in the talk, pause for questions at that moment and use the Q&A function predominantly. Hopefully people will do that. And then we'll have questions at the end. You can post questions in the Q&A at any point during it. I will be sharing my screen. Gwen and others will be monitoring the Q&A in case there's something that, you know, we're stopping for in the middle. Happy to stop for them in the middle, but as I've learned in the webinar format, can be a bit difficult to see at times. So let's go ahead and get started sharing the screen. The talk is titled Questioning Assumptions in Teaching and Learning. And so therefore it seemed obvious to start with a slide on physics and my study of foams and bubbles. And the reason I put this up here as a physics example is I think it nicely illustrates some things I've been thinking about when it comes to teaching and learning, but even actually larger areas of questions about faculty and research and service. But it's this idea that scale really matters. And when you study bubbles and foams, you know, a question we like to ask people is, well, is a foam a collection of air, gas bubbles, and liquid walls? Is it a fluid or a solid? I encourage you to kind of meditate on that for just 30 seconds. Is a foam a fluid or a solid? And if you were forced to answer that question, what would your reason be? I actually looked at my clock. That wasn't quite 30 seconds, but having that sort of reflection in dead silence on a Zoom webinar is more challenging than in a large room with people thinking and talking to each other. But what you hopefully started to think about was that question gets answered slightly differently depending on what scale you look at. If I'm over here looking at the very microscopic scale, I see surfactant molecules at the interface between air bubbles and water. Every molecule in this is in some sort of fluid state. It's a liquid or a gas by all of our normal definitions. And that is the microscopic structure. It's very important. It does play a role in how the larger foam behaves. You want to understand it. And is this scale that I would argue most of the discussions I've been involved in around teaching and learning focus on. We focus on the individual student or the individual instructor and what's happening there. Now, at some level, we maybe go up to what you might consider the next scale, the scale of the class. What's happening in the classroom? Active learning kind of moved us to that scale because you're looking at interactions among clusters of students. And in our foam analogy, that's the thin films or the single bubbles in the foam. It's higher scale, more collective than individual molecules, but not quite the whole foam. What really intrigues me and what I'll be talking about in this talk is focusing on what do we gain by when we think about this larger structure, this collective, whether it's departments, the student body as a whole, the curriculum as a whole. And when you look at the collective in the foam, what's exciting is we get entirely new physics that aren't here at the lower level. As I said, at the microscopic level, everything is a fluid. Foams are inherently both solids and fluids, depending on what you do to them. They can hold their shape like a solid, but they can flow like a fluid. And so focusing on this scale allows us, I think, to do some very new and exciting things. Does not replace what happens at the microscopic level. So all of the research about individual student learning, instructor styles, active learning at the classroom, I'm not going to be talking about that a lot today on purpose. I'm going to be asking the question, what happens when we focus there? Not because it's not important, not because it doesn't have a deep impact on what happens at the higher level, but simply because I think there are new questions here we haven't really explored yet, or at least I have not been involved in those conversations. And the other reason I love giving talks is I'm sure there are people who have thought about these things or done this that I don't know about, who will hopefully bring that up, and I'll learn more myself. So that is an interesting, I hope, way of setting up a talk on teaching, is to give you that short little 5-minute lesson on foams. So what do assumptions of scale really mean when we come to teaching? Well, for me, it's the individual instructor versus the instructional team. We'll go into more detail about that, but if you think about it, we always are evaluating just the instructor. We're trying to do professional development for the instructor. There's been a lot more interesting work on faculty learning communities, or sort of doing the reform at the department level. It is a newer thing, but the core and most of the focus has been at the individual instructor. We always seem to focus on the course versus the full 4-year curriculum from a similar direction and focus. And really, a lot of our focus as the student is individual students. And when you think about this, it makes a lot of sense from the academic perspective. I don't know about you all, but in most of the meetings I'm in about merits or promotion, or even hiring, we are worried about, is the faculty member under question or the applicant being considered, are they independent? It comes up incredibly often. Are they independent from their advisor, their grad advisor, their postdoc advisor? Are they working independently? Are they doing independent work? Is the individual successful? We actually explicitly and implicitly in academics are a very individual focused effort. And our instruction and our courses and our view of students is very individual. How is that individual student doing? Are they successful? We want to make sure, if we ever do group work, both the students and the faculty are like, well, how do we know who contributed and how much? Making sure the students get the appropriate recognition or the appropriate penalty. And often in our discussions, people are too worried about making sure students are appropriately penalized for not having done things on their own. And it feeds into the way we think about academic integrity, the way we think about exams as being these individual efforts where you have access to limited amount of material and you do it on your own. I'm not saying that's necessarily all bad, but I am just trying to point out and emphasize we have a very strong assumption that the relevant and most important and key scale is the individual. And we do that at all 3 levels. And what I would like to make an argument for, and maybe it's my bias towards liking foams over individual surfactant molecules, is that really we need to start taking serious some of the steps we've made into thinking about the instructional team, the 4-year curriculum, and the student team. So I'm going to take each of these one at a time and just say a few short things. I'm going to pause at that point for some questions and answers. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how I see this impacting maybe a model for change and one example from UCI in that space. So when I think about instructional teams, one of the things, any team or orchestra or drama performance, if you think of any sort of activity that involves a group of people, you can usually identify sort of a well-defined base set of skills that everyone starts with. So I coached a lot of soccer, no matter what position you play in soccer, you're going to have a core set of starting skills. In teaching, this is going to be what I would call our evidence-based teaching practices. And this is where a lot of the work has been, establishing what is that base set we should all have. In the orchestra, everybody has a base set of musical ability and skills. If you're putting on a drama play, same with acting. But in any of these sort of team arenas, there is a specialization of excellence. On the soccer team, you have the goalie, the defenders, midfielders, forwards. In the orchestra, you have the violin section, the viola section, brass, percussion, and you don't expect people to be equally good at every instrument. And it's interesting, in our discussions of teaching, I sometimes feel like we are actually trying to make every individual equally excellent. And this is another underlying, perhaps implicit assumption in our academic culture that when pushed on it, I think nobody really tries to achieve this, but we are often viewing people as they need to be equally excellent in research, teaching, and service. and they need to be equally excellent in all aspects of research, teaching, and service. Well, then in practice at a research university, maybe just research, not teaching so much, all of those traditional conversations that occur. But I know in my physics department and many departments around the nation and world, there's this idea that you should be able to teach at every level, and we cycle people through all the courses. Many tenure conversations have come up. Well, they haven't yet taught an intro course, or they haven't taught a grad course. We need to make sure they can teach everything. And it just struck me that this is one of the only places where we assume equal excellence. And in fact, we don't always do it in practice. There's this idea that not everybody should teach a lab course. We recognize not everybody is really equally good at the first year courses, though we want them all in there for some reason, because we have to balance this with the strange idea that somehow someone might get away with something if they're not doing everything we all want them to do. But the reality is, if we're going to be an excellent department, it really does require recognizing that there is a base core competency, but let's recognize diverse teams are more successful and embrace the diversity of teaching expertise, interest, and excellence in the faculty. And so this could lead to things like differential teaching assignments. And Gwen and I talked about this a little bit when we were planning for this. And, there are places definitely talking about how do we do that? We still want fairness and equity, but we also want, the excellence of leveraging what was put up here. And as I said, a lot of places have learning communities, faculty learning communities to leverage the team idea. It's a growing idea. There's been some interesting talks I've heard at various places about, doing sort of reform in teaching, not necessarily at the course level, but even at the department level, and getting department teams together. So I'd like to pause here and just see if there's some initial reactions or questions to this. There may not be. We can discuss this all at the end, but I thought it was worth taking a short pause. And to make that easier on me, I'm going to stop sharing at this moment. We'll see if anything shows up in the Q&A. I'll give it a couple of seconds. And if not, I'll go on with the talk.
Michael, I'll ask a question real quick.
Sure.
The whole concept of kind of moving away from the individual to see the larger context is very sociological, and I'm a sociologist, so I really appreciate foam. In fact, some people think we should talk about society as a foam, as a matter of fact. So, could you say just a little bit more about why, in your experience as a faculty member and also as an administrator and a leader of faculty, have you seen that level of analysis or that level of reform work really pay dividends for students, for institutions, for all involved? Do things get better when we do this?
So my hypothesis is yes, Steve. And at the end, I'm going to talk about just some very initial stuff we've been doing at UCI. I know I've heard of some very nice work out of Kansas and some other places where, let me put it this way, I can't imagine it won't, which is why I've decided to go this way, because I don't know, an orchestra is always excellent, when they work together as a team, way better than when you stick a bunch of musicians who think they all need to do their own thing and have them try and play. Now, occasionally that works too, like if you're doing jazz and they know what they're doing. But, every team I've coached, I've seen teams totally fall apart where there are 11 superstars who don't play as a team and they lose. So this is what's kind of inspired me to do it. I'm real curious. I have not seen this as a true real reform movement yet. It gets close in some places, where you are looking at the reform of the curriculum and you get a department together. I've seen a little bit that in our history department, actually did some great work with program learning outcomes very recently. It still remains to be seen the total impact on students. So I think people are starting to get this as an idea because, let's face it, there's been many papers written on the individual champion of course reform and how that fails and is not sustainable. So I think we've seen the individual effort fail enough that people are now interested in going in this route. Gwen, did you want to say anything? I don't know how far you all are on differential teaching assignments. There's a good question about equitable differential and what factors are really critical.
I was actually going to highlight some of the questions in the chat, but since you've given me the invitation, I want to take a minute and really foreground some fabulous work being done by instructor teams in foundational chemistry, general chemistry 1, and foundational biology, our Life 102 team. Those two teams had worked as separate teams, each of them integrating active learning and the use of undergraduate peer educator learning assistants, and made statistically significant differences, quite remarkable ones, in the course success rates for each of those courses. So there were those teams for each course achieving that outcome. This summer, those two teams worked together. I just read their report about a week ago to identify misconceptions, I think, that were mostly coming from foundational biology into general chemistry, and to identify places where different terminology was used for the same concept or phenomenon in the two courses and was causing misconceptions for students. They also did things like work biology examples into the chemistry courses and refine some of the delivery in both courses to really clarify for students.
Great, thank you. You know, and I saw some of the questions. I'm going to pull up my screen sharing again, because I think I can use that to talk about, you know, the vulnerabilities and how to think about equitable differential teaching assignments. So if I bring that back up. So I think one of the key things, if you're going to talk about differential teaching assignments, if you're going to look for equity, and if you're going to look for possible failure points, it's really this base agreement of what is the base set of skills. Because I think that helps insulate a little bit against the idea that people are taking unfair advantage of the system. If as a department, and it really requires a fairly functional department that can have some of these honest and open discussions of, okay, what's the base set of skills that we're starting with? What are the different contributions we want from different people? How are we going to balance them? And then how do we build on that, these specializations in areas of excellence? You know, for myself personally, I happen to love teaching intro physics to bio majors. And if I did that most of the time and had a few other courses, so I wasn't totally getting bored that I was cycling between, I would actually personally not mind if certain colleagues never taught that class or any intro class. But again, it's part of reaching that space where you're in a mental space where everybody doesn't have to do everything. Like, that's not the fairness, right? Fairness isn't everybody doing the same thing, but it's all of us having that same starting point. I think we may not be there yet in some departments, is agreement on the base set of skills. So for me, this is probably a challenging step in making it to where we can really think about specialization of excellence and teams of excellence. I'm going to go on now to the student idea. And one of the things I tried to sort of illustrate in this image, this picture here, is I think in almost every field, we think of learning as a spiral. Certain competencies, skills, and topics, students come back to over and over again. And yet, in my mind, the way we treat a lot of things is we actually force students on these sort of linear paths through their curriculum. STEM, it's very obvious with the prereq structure, but even I think in non-STEM disciplines where writing is key, we actually, instead of allowing students to spiral and build their skills over and over and repeat things, if you don't make it through that first level, you're sort of thrown off my spiral stained glass staircase here, or whatever this is. If you can't make it through, you can't make it through. If you miss the first level, you're out. And this is the problem of gateway courses. And this is what I consider the barrier to what I call 4 years to learn. I was recently thinking about this. We talk about you have 4 years to learn. How do you actually leverage the full 4 years if so many students are sorted in their first year on interesting and what I would call narrow criteria? If you want to rethink this, program outcomes are key. And I mentioned our history department. They did a really, really useful thing that I think many engineering departments actually already do because of ABET. They actually sat down as a department and said, you know, what are the 5 or 6 or 10, I forget the number, of things we want our students to be able to do when they graduate. They took it very seriously, not just as a WASC or accreditation requirement. And they said, okay, where are those learning occurring in the curriculum? And let's emphasize for students and let them know which outcome maps to which course, so the students can see explicitly the spiral through the curriculum. And then I would argue we could ask the next question, well, how do we turn that into a better evaluation process where, okay, if you are struggling grade-wise in the gateway course, can we have a better understanding which element of the spiral were you struggling with? And so in the next circle of the spiral, you can focus on the ones you need, reinforce those while still leveraging what you were pretty good at ahead of time. I use my own personal sort of example in physics. Physics, we do classical mechanics, E&M, and quantum multiple times. And basically, what I was very good at was solving word problems, which is what all the exams were. And I was very, very good at getting partial credit. I figure I have tenure now, I can admit to this. I tended to take the straight path through without necessarily learning all the stuff on the spiral until much later. There are definitely physics concepts that I should have probably learned better earlier, but I could get through the curriculum without doing it. And I certainly had peers who dropped out early in the spiral because they were focusing on understanding the physics and hadn't mastered how to get a good grade on the test by doing the word problems and the math. That's just a reality of my experience that I think actually is many students' experience, because we focus on the individual course and what we have is the inter-course grade. And so curriculum design is so key. And I give a shout out to Greg here. He's presented at other Euro events before, and that's a website, a link to an article from him. But we have to think about our curriculum and are we giving students the accurate spiral through? And finally, I do think this requires authentic assessment. I mentioned, you know, the exams in physics, we have to think very carefully about, and it's the field I'm most familiar with, which is why I'm using that example, and be honest that for the most part in the undergraduate curriculum in physics, unless there's been heavy reform work in the assessment side, you are mostly assessing the ability to solve word problems and the ability to do algebra calculations. Authentic assessment really takes us in a new direction. It's an area, I will be honest, I know way too little about. It's one of the reasons I put it in this talk. I hope to have more discussions with people afterwards. I'm looking for great examples of where this is happening, where people are doing it. So please reach out to me after the talk. I'm looking for information there. Let's go ahead and take another couple of minutes for people to react or have questions in this space. And this may be one that's really worth discussing more at the end, but I'll just give it another minute or 30 seconds here. Okay, I'm actually going to go on now with that, but I will make one other quick comment about what I consider my latest, most crazy idea is we're probably really close to a world where we actually don't have to give individual grades in courses anymore that are a very coarse-grained measure of what you did. I teach a math methods course. It's basically half linear algebra type discrete math and half more vector calculus and differential equations. And what I've noticed over the years is there's students who get an A in the course, they do both. The average student getting a B or high C really has mastered one of the two and done really badly at the other one. And that information is not captured in the grade. But if you imagine taking this program outcome idea very seriously, you could have, I don't know, 10 to 15 categories that students have to demonstrate mastery in. And each course could identify the 2 or 3 that it's focused on, and you get a score in that. So you take my course and now we know, oh, you're done with both of those, or you're only done with one of them. And they all show up in later courses, and you have a chance later on to master whatever you missed. And you're not carrying around, say, a C for the rest of your career as a student because you mastered half and didn't get the other half. You're carrying around that you've mastered half, you've accomplished that, and you can move on. So that's just a thought for those of you out there designing data systems as to how we can do that. So the other idea is the student as a collective. And this is an interesting one. There's a lot of focus on what our individual students are doing, making sure all of our students are achieving success, how different students learn. All of this, as I said, incredibly important. But what does it mean to think of our students as a group or a team? And I think when I talk about this, the first thing that comes to mind for many people is group work, which is very important. I think there's a lot of active learning techniques involve students working in group and class. There's a lot of project-based learning that involves students working in groups. And I think the group is an important level. It's a little bit like that bubble or film level in my initial analogy. It's not quite the whole collective because it's an isolated small group that's part of the whole class. And I think when we think about group work, it's a great place to start because it's a nice model system for the challenges of what does it mean for students to learn as a team. Learning communities are another great one. Many universities have these, sometimes associated with the housing, sometimes in other formats. And that's a great space for us to sort of learn a lot about and connect with in various ways. One of the great barriers to students learning as a collective is the infamous grading on a curve. That just ranks students, and immediately it makes students, understand that they're on their own. They really necessarily can't work with each other because if they help someone else and they do better, then their grade is hurt. I put these 3 up here because we do have group work, we do have learning communities. So what do I really mean as students as a collective? And this was really inspired about 3 or 4 years ago. I met with a group of students, a group of African-American women from biosci came to me concerned about the climate in biosci and the culture and their learning experience. And we had a very, very good series of conversations. One of the things they said that really, really struck with me at one point is they're like, why is it we have to always be competing against each other? We just want to learn biology. Why can't we just all work together to learn biology? And that was really a transformative statement for me because it's so true. What I love about having stayed in academics is I got to stay around a ton of people who love to learn. My colleagues maybe were always so excited that I would randomly stop by their office with questions and discuss maybe when they had a proposal due or a paper due. But the seminar, the informal tea we had in the physics department, the chance to just be in a community that loved to learn and continue to learn for my career was what drew me into academics. It's also what I loved as an undergrad, interacting with other undergraduates and learning from them. And there's really no point, excuse me, in the curriculum where we get actually any credit for that or explicitly leverage it. And so I think this is the space more than ever that we need to be creative and think about how this works in other spaces. And the key element that we need to balance in my mind is competition versus cooperation. I'm going to use sports teams and orchestras and drama productions as my 3 main examples here. I've been heavily involved in sports teams. I play them, I coach them. I love watching or listening to orchestras and watching drama productions, and I know a lot of people deeply involved in those. And one of the things that all 3 of these strike me as is when they work well, they balance the necessary competition to improve with the necessary collaboration to be excellent. So I'll just pick on orchestra, right? you are at the appropriate times competing against the other members of the orchestra, say to be first chair violin, second chair. But at the end of the day, when that's been sorted out, you work together to make the best possible performance. And you make each other better in that process. When you're practicing and rehearsing, whether it's a team or a drama production, you are not trying to compete against, you're not getting graded on a curve. The coach, the conductor, the director are not worried about whether you're doing it completely on your own. If you learn something from someone else and incorporate it into what you're doing, that is considered a win for the whole team, the whole orchestra, the whole drama production. And everybody in there is actually getting better through the process. And it's an incredible collective process of learning that has individual elements. And for some reason, in most cases, this has not taken off in education, but it has in almost every other sort of group endeavor I've been involved in. Now, active learning comes close, and I think that's one of the exciting sort of necessary steps, right? Is that you have this idea where you go from, just listening as an individual to the class to actively being engaged with your peers. But I think it would be very interesting to take a look at it from this team perspective. So I would like to pause here for one more set of questions, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what does this team mentality have from the perspective of change. And that'll go back to one of the earlier questions is, if I'm running programming for departments, how would I do this? I didn't answer that question yet because I haven't done a lot yet on this theme. You're getting these ideas. You're the first to hear this as a coherent whole. So pieces of this I've done, but not collectively. So let's check in. Oh, Stephanie, thank you. There's a great comment about looking at asset mapping, Stoddard and Pfeiffer's work. Thank you for that. That's very good. Any other comments on the student one or questions?
In the chat, Michael, I don't know if you can.
Oh, is there something in the chat?
Yeah, check out the chat. Ryan has a question there.
Okay. Ryan, I think that's a great question from an assessment point of view, right? There is both, particular skills that they bring to the activity. But again, I think there's also still the baseline skills. And so in the classroom, I think the analogy still holds up, right? You need assessment of individuals, right? So when you come in, pick an orchestra, right? There's a certain level of music theory, reading music, independent of your instrument, there's some basic music skills you need to get assessed on and learn as you're going through. Same when soccer teams is what I coached. Oh, sorry, Hillary. Yes, I'll read the question. The question is regarding grading students as a collective. In teams, orchestras, and drama productions, each person has a very particular role skill that they bring to the activity. In learning, the unique skills, abilities that are needed are less clear. How does that change the situation? And so I think it doesn't change. I think there's both always the baseline skill and the individual skill. And Liz has reposted the question for people. If I think about the soccer team or the orchestra, we often highlight very much the difference. Oh, that's a violinist. That's a trombone player, or that's a forward, or that's a goalie. In fact, to get to that level, the first thing you had to build was your base, soccer skills, your base set of skills in music, reading music, and understanding it. And those skills you often built by a combination of individual work and working with others. You learn from each other, but you also spend some time learning alone. And I think that analogy is exactly, as you progress through your, 20 plus years of schooling, you're going to go back and forth between working on your own and working in the team. By the time you get to the level of being a college student is where I would argue you start to see that particular role skill sort of expertise start to develop. You get a little bit of the specialization. And I don't think that's the part, I think, when we think of students, we're still trying to make our undergrads all exactly the same. So if I ask the question of what makes a great physics student, they are all graded on the same very narrow set of standards that does seem to produce good physicists, but also tends to act too much as a filter for other physics skills that you might need. So you can imagine having a broader but not lower set of standards that all offers sort of different pathways through. So the undergraduate physics degree is very focused on the theory and the math by far. It's way outweighed over any experimental skills. We are lucky that we get some experimentalists like myself out of the system. But imagine a better balance of that. And as you said, teams have individual auditions and are usually hired individually. So, but not in a vacuum, right? And I think that's the other challenge, right? When we think about the team approach, I'm sorry, Tim Grogan posted a great question. Teams still have individual auditions and are hired individually. Good hirers do look to form a team, but that seems much less common than getting a collection of individuals. So for our students, how will the team approach help them compete well after graduation when they want to be hired by someone? And Tim, I think this is the biggest question for me, because there's both reforming what we do and also having some influence on what the next stage is. And again, if you're truly doing it the way I'm envisioning, this core baseline set of skills with individual specialization helps a student maybe understand where they would fit in the job market, because people are actually looking to form a team. And if we give students the context and the language about what they're bringing into the workplace, what's their base set of skills and what's their specialization, that would help. And there's a nice post by Matthew Trevitt with the challenge-based learning, and Stephanie added a little bit more about the asset mapping, where students actually bring in different skills to the group to assist each other. So a lot of good things in the chat. And
Michael, there's also a question from Alice Donlin regarding specialization. Is the undergraduate degree program where students master base skills and then electives in chosen areas of focus where students master specializations? Would you say instead degree programs should have fewer required courses?
Alice, I think that's exactly one direction I would go. I think we overprescribe our degree programs fundamentally, because whether they are on purpose or subconscious, they're designed explicitly for the narrow path to grad school. And we feel like, oh, if you're missing this, or you're missing this, or you're missing this, you won't be successful in grad school. So we over-constrain, I would argue, most degree programs, instead of really focusing on that spiral experience, giving multiple pathways, giving lots of different ways for students to do this. I don't think we do a very good job of thinking of the collective degree, though I think we're really, really starting to do that. And then Katie, I think, had something in the Q&A. Big advocate for active learning here. However, we do get pushback from students who don't see the college classroom environment as an appropriate place for teamwork or collaborative learning. They didn't pay for college to teach themselves, their paraphrased words. We need to encourage and explain this type of learning at our institutions from the beginning, admissions, orientation, etc. Okay, and Jeff had a nice post in the chat as well. This is great. With the time, I'm going to quickly switch back to a few slides in the presentation, which may get a little bit towards the comment about how do we help convince students this is a good thing to do. So when I thought about this, I realized, okay, people are always talking about models or theories of change, and I never thought I had one or knew one, but I realized I now do. A lot of people in probably the last 6 months have mentioned all the idea of the rider, the elephant in the path. If you haven't heard about that, we can get you references. It's a great idea. It's a model of change where the rider is basically the rational side of things trying to drive the elephant, which is all the emotional and sort of why you do things. And then you have the path you're taking, which is kind of the space you're working in and dealing with. And if you want change, you can change the rider through logic and reason and data. You can change the elephant through some emotional thing, or you can actually change the path. And from my perspective, what I'm mostly talking about here is a lot of our work has been trying to address the rider and the elephant of the individual faculty and the individual student as to why you should do things differently. So you should do active learning, and the student sits there and goes, no, I'm here for myself. I'm here to have you tell me what I need to know. Why am I doing this active learning thing? And I think it's because our path is so defined by the individual effort at every stage. And if we can work on clearly identifying a team path, I think our rider and elephant will find a much easier route to change, I claim. All of this is hypothetical, but I'm hoping over the next year to get some good evidence why this will work. So when we think about the individual approach, say faculty, we like to give them a lot of data, evidence-based instruction, outcomes are improved. We talk about changing the reward structure, then that'll be very logical. That's also partly emotional in the elephant, but it's also partly, we claim they're reasonable people, and if they're rewarded for things, they would do it. And what happens is the rider ends up jumping off the elephant and trying to pull the elephant in this new direction, because emotionally, the average faculty in the past, they have a sense that they're teaching well. Look, students do well in my course, they're successful. Plenty of students are getting A's and B's. Because when you really look at the data, yes, we're improving. All of this is right. We're doing lots of great things. But for most, particularly top tier institutions, it's sort of hidden all of the great gains we're getting because of how well our students do tend to navigate the current system. And for the students, they've spent, 18 years learning a certain way, and this is uncomfortable, and they don't want to make the change. Now, we can take the elephant, the emotional part, and make it a positive change agent. And more recently, when you talk to faculty and you show that certain teaching reforms improve diversity and inclusion, that gets the elephant very excited and you start seeing motion. At least has been our experience. And a number of colleagues have shared that as well. This is also a place where I think if we really can do a good job of providing the bright spots of success, and lowering some of the barriers. I've noticed this at UCI, my role as Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning. Look, I was teaching at UCI for 20 odd years before I took on this role. And for good or bad, most faculty, my colleagues, knew all the crazy stuff I did in my class. So one of my first messages was, you don't have to do everything I did. Here's some very simple, easy things, and look at the huge change or big, switch you get in the students. And focusing on these small, easy, bright spots can really help. But changing the path is a key thing. And I think there's plenty of research that's shown when individuals are having to change alone, that's difficult, particularly if they're having to do everything to transform their class. And so attempting to make this more of a team effort and think of it as a team right from the beginning. And I've actually had my initial sort of conversations this way. Faculty have gotten very excited. Deans and chairs have particularly gotten excited because an individual faculty actually may not have to change that much initially, right? If you're talking about leveraging the strengths of the department and you're already good at a lot of things in teaching, you may not have to do a lot different in your own individual teaching, other than really become part of the team and actively support the people who are doing things instead of passively supporting them or working against them. That is sort of an exciting shift that can help move things. And once we're a team, we can really learn from each other. Some of my colleagues started doing active learning in their class just by kind of being aware of the teaching evaluations that I was getting, talking to me about it, and realizing that, like, one of my main motivations was if I had an active learning activity and discussion section, then they were better prepared to do the homework because they kind of saw what they needed to do rather than me solving, the one homework problem on the board that students were stuck with. And they're like, oh, wow, that's amazing. They're better prepared to do this. That's why you're doing it. And they learned and put it into their class. I also like leveraging the competitive friendly spirit. You know, the more we're acting as a team, the more we're communicating on teaching, and the more you're kind of like, oh, well, that's not that hard, and they're doing it, and I'd like to do that a little bit better too. More importantly, we can leverage the department's desire to be the best ranked department in some category. Now, I get it. Teaching doesn't necessarily hugely go into rankings at the moment, but I think we're seeing a lot of movement in the world of rankings around social mobility, equity, and outcomes and undergraduate outcomes gaining in their importance in department ranking. And if we work together to be number one and beat out the department that usually beats us, because we can move our teaching needle faster as a team, and sort of leverage that aspect as rankings change, I'm not opposed to using that. That's a partly emotional, the elephant, but it's also the path. You've made it a team effort. One quick example from UCI. We hear a lot about student success, and we've done some work in the last year or two over what I'm calling course success. And this axis, I'm still referring to it as instructors. I want to change that to courses. I want to remove the instructor from the discussion. What we've done is taken a particular department and asked the question, for all the courses in that department over, say, the last 5 years, what is the average difference in, say, grade in the course for, say, this, I forget actually which category this was. We do it by gender, we do it by race, we do it by first gen, we do it by low income. And what you see is many courses, let's suppose this was low income, the low income students are performing on average less than the non-low income students. And the red bar is the median. This is if you just look at the percent of A's and B's in the course. But what you notice, and this is in every department across campus, there are courses in which the gap is zero, or in fact, the low income students are outperforming the non-low income students. And we have deemed those successful courses. And we've made this a department level discussion where it's not like I said, this is an old slide and I forgot to remove instructors. We don't even mention instructors at the beginning. We mention the courses. And this does a couple of things by thinking of it as a collection of courses. We're focusing on the structures, not the faculty initially. The first question we want to ask is, are there course structures like active learning, more low stakes exams, the way the syllabus is written? Are these structures correlated highly with the better performing courses? The answer is looking like yes. There's not a simple, super easy smoking gun, but there are some directions where it's easy to say to faculty, look, we see these structures seem to be successful. These are easy to implement. Let's make that a department-wide thing, that these structures are what we introduce. It becomes a department-wide issue. It's the department courses that are having trouble. No individual faculty is on the hook for this, no individual student. This is the same students, just different courses. And some of these courses have the same performance over 5 years. So you can say, oh, maybe it was a different class of students. No, it's the same course. And this really helps with the argument that, well, the students are just underprepared. They're being successful in some of our courses. So how can it be the students' deficits? And so I would argue all scales matter. We focus on the student, we focus on the individual faculty, but there's really a whole bunch of students. They make up the student body. There's a whole bunch of faculty. They make up the departments, and all together we make up the university. And a huge apology, I didn't even talk about, because I don't have time, the staff and the role they play. They're clearly a major feature of this, and I should have put them on this slide as well. So thank you for your time and attention. And I think we have time for some more questions at the end briefly. Steve, Gwen, how are we doing on that?
Yeah, we do have about 5 minutes for questions.
I apologize there wasn't more time at the end, but that's why I took them in the middle. I wanted to make sure we discussed them as the topics came up.
Again,
Go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say again, Gwen, as a sociologist, I'm excited by this basic perspective because we're focusing on not the individual instructor or student, but all the contexts in which learning occurs. And that feels to me like the change there will be so much more long lasting because it's true institutional change that will lead to cultural change, and we'll really see our universities serving our students and ourselves better if we work at this level. It feels really good to me. What were you
And
going to say?
Steve,
I'm sorry.
no,
Yeah.
one quick thing on that, and then Gwen, I'll let you go. And I think it's both easier and harder in some ways. Like the hard piece is that we as faculty are not trained to think of ourselves as a collective. We're really not. I think universities used to be much more of a collective just because of the nature of them, but we are trained to be individual agents. And so that's the piece we need to recover. But once you do that, so much else of this becomes much easier and flows. And I think it would also have a huge mental health benefit in the area of research. When we think about the stress junior faculty are under in the space of research, I am very worried for the academy and where we're going to go, just from that aspect alone. And I think if we don't get our act together and really regain the culture of being a team, we're going to see some serious, serious problems in the next 5 to 10 years.
And actually, my question would pick up on, pardon me, on that point, and also your point about not having time to address the role of staff, Michael. But I do want to call out that I think it was Matthew Trevitt Smith, for those of you who may be interested, posted a link to the new edition of Small Teaching, an excellent book that does align closely with what Michael Dennin was talking about. So, Michael, in 3 minutes or less, this question, I think, speaks to that issue of team, developing the sense of team for faculty, and in particular with respect to faculty members' potential collaboration with staff members. And I'm drawing on the way that a colleague here often talks about the construction of really high quality online courses as relying on an ecosystem. So you have the faculty member who is the subject matter expert, you have instructional designers who bring that perspective, and you have instructional technologists who know the potentials and limitations of the various technologies being used to deliver the course. I would argue that ideally, that a similar ecosystem would apply to what we pre-pandemic thought of as exclusively face-to-face courses, and now what I think most of us are thinking about as some version of hybrid or blended. And I see there is another question, so I'll just say, what are your thoughts?
Well, you know what, Gwen, ironically, I think that question actually works nicely with Alice's question around how do we guide faculty conversations, identifying true core courses versus the barriers of hard time giving up topics and worried about preparing for grad schools. And I think this is, again, where the collective idea becomes so important. We are, we have both, I think, this ecosystem, like you said, for developing our course and our structure. That is critical. We can work together. I mean, that's where teaching and learning centers come in. I know at UCI, one of the small silver linings of the pandemic was faculty now truly understand our teaching and learning center, not just to go where you're in trouble, but to go to get help, because it's what got them through the pandemic. And they have a new realization of the ecosystem they're in, that they don't have to do it on their own. And if you realize that, okay, the freshman course is not the only time we're going to get all of these topics. And more importantly, go back to our core philosophy. Every faculty member I've ever talked to at some point has said, I am just teaching people to learn. The specific topics don't matter, right? Until you ask them to remove the topic from their course. Then suddenly that topic is the only topic in the world that cannot be learned on your own, but has to be learned in your class. But reminding ourselves of this core philosophy, that there is a spiral, that there is time for students to revisit things in later courses. And we don't have to prepare everyone for grad school, because those who are going to grad school will still do the right thing in the course of the curriculum. It's not like we're getting rid of it. It is just one option. And to me, that last piece is about trusting students. I think that's the hard thing, but that's the conversation, Alice, that I've actually had some success with, is reminding faculty that students actually do care. We tend to, as humans, get distracted by the outliers that are negative. We've become very focused about worrying about the student who cheats, very focused about worrying about the student who's just here for a grade, very focused about worrying about the student who doesn't seem to care. And yet, I told you, the first thing when I met with those students who were complaining about the culture and bio, I was like, why don't they get it that we're just here to learn, right? There is a deep passion for most of our students about learning, but the outliers take most of our attention. And Ellen, just quickly, the question about identifying and recognizing faculty members and staff's expertise. For me, a lot of it is just, once we get everyone to agree that we might actually be a team, to have that conversation. Like at UCI, most faculty are passionate about teaching at some level, and most of them just don't have time because of the pressure we put on research. So let's have the honest conversation. We're the ones who control how much pressure we put on research and what we expect as standards of research. And they've only exponentially grown in my lifetime. So we just have to start having these conversations, and we will learn what people are passionate about, hidden things that they're really good about. We'll find out what they actually do in their class in many cases when we don't know, what they're doing. So shockingly, Ellen, I think the best strategy is to try and find time in faculty meetings to talk about the idea of being a team and what that means. That may be very naive of me, but I am an optimistic, naive person.
On that optimistic note, we've come to the top of the hour and want to thank Dr. Dennin, Dr. Gorzleski, and everyone who's joined this town hall. It will be posted at the URU website, and we thank you all for your participation today, especially you, Michael. Thank you for this provocation.
You're welcome. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Gwen, for hosting.
A lot of kudos in the chat. Well deserved. We're going to make you an honorary sociologist, Michael.
Well, yeah, between you and my daughter, I think I can't avoid that.
Let's try it.
Yeah.
Let's get you a joint appointment. Like that's not the last thing you need, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, I have to say, I think, the next step is starting to implement some of this, but I really think, there's the last 2 points in the Q&A. It's true. In the end of the day, an instructor does have to implement things in their classroom. But again, I think if we're really being a collective team, we don't all have to implement the same thing in our classroom. And that's the beauty of it, right? And
yeah, when I was at the University of Dayton, a Catholic university where I spent my first 13 years, this was kind of taken for granted. There was an emphasis,
Yep.
It was first as a private school, and secondly, as a Catholic school. And my department didn't have a graduate program. So all those factors are in the background, but there was a real sense of division of labor.
yeah,
We all didn't have to be great at everything. We were working together as a team. Some of the things you talked about, the individual focus was present even there, but there was a high level of collective thinking,
yeah,
and solidarity even. And it did take some of the pressure off. You didn't have to be good at everything.
no, it does.
We did see the students course through the curriculum, and we kind of thought of them as a shared responsibility, heading toward a series of pretty well-defined collective goal, learning outcomes. It felt more like aligned with what your vision was or is,
Well,
than the big research universities that we work at currently. Maybe.
Yeah, I suspect there was that panel at one of the reinvention collaborative meetings.
Mhm.
I think it was mostly Catholic universities, but sort of about mission-driven universities.
Yeah.
Right. And I do think, if it doesn't have to be Catholic, but if you're at a place that has a clearly defined mission,
Yeah.
you're going to be much more likely working in the department as a collective team.
Yeah.
And I think public research universities, Steve, I think have a chance of really getting back in touch with their mission of serving the public. And that can help drive this.
Yes, I heard you say that, and I thought it really aligned with the Boyer Commission conversation, where there's a real heavy emphasis on exactly that. And also maybe even kind of harken back to a time in which even large research universities had a greater community quality to them. Maybe they weren't quite as differentiated, quite as, bureaucratic in different ways, but that getting back to that collective and community, that was really important. Let's go ahead and close. I know you probably got to run to something else, and I'm sure Gwen does. And so we're just really grateful.
Yeah, no,
both
this
of
is
you.
great.
Gwen, is this okay? You think I think it was
This was
great.
fabulous. I will say, Michael, your point about how departments might rethink what they're doing as more trying to friendly competition with each other and what they're achieving as a team prompted me to think our unit produces materials that assist departments with annual review. Right now that's by choice, but the Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs encourages it, and we have a fair number, I'd say at least half probably,
Right.
who have adopted. And your point made me think we should integrate into those materials more emphasis on what is the role that somebody is playing as part of an instructor team, whether that's in a foundational course or in a course in thinking through the curriculum as a whole.
Yeah,
So,
no, that would be great.
yeah, thanks.
Great.
Thanks for the shout out
Thank
for
you,
Greg
Mark.
Heilman too. We're going to announce the Ascendium grant here pretty quick. So it's a nice connection.
Oh, good, good.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks,
Michael.
everyone.
Take care.